Hello Mishbucha, it's Courtney, America's Jewish Mother. Welcome back to my channel, and happy new and improved year to everyone watching. I think, we're all hopeful that 2021 is going to be a lot better than the absolute garbage fire that 2020 was, so hooray. So it's Friday, so I'm back for a Friday Reads video, and because it's also the first of the month, this is going to be a combo Friday Reads / also December wrap-up video. So I will first do the Friday Reads portion because there are 4 books that I finished in the past week that I have not yet given full reviews on. And then I'll also share briefly about what I'm currently reading, and then I'll do the full wrap-up of my December reading. So let's go. So the first book I finished this week was Goethe's Faust. This is a... Scott at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot volunteered the term epic play because it's a play, but it's also in the form of, say, an epic poem, so epic play. I like that. We're going to go with that. In 2 parts, and this particular edition was a little annoying to keep track of where I was because it starts off numbering the pages in a standard book, right? And then once it gets to the end of the first part, it starts renumbering the pages in part 2 from 1 again. So I would have to, to keep track of where I was, I would have to add 179, which was the amount of pages in part 1 of the book, to whatever page I was on from part 2 of the book. So that was really annoying. But anyway, so I finished this. This is the story of Dr. Faustus, or Faust, and then at the beginning of the play, Mephistopheles, or the devil, makes kind of a bet with the Almighty that he can tempt Faust and steal his soul. Basically, it's all very sort of biblical Book of Job-like in its setup. And so then in part 1 of the play, I'm just going to call it a play, Mephistopheles meets Faust, befriends him, tries to help him get with this woman Margaret that he is lusting over, and then in part 2 some weird stuff happens and it kind of goes off the rails. So it seems to me like part 1 of this epic play is really kind of concerned with thinking about Faust and Mephistopheles from, I was almost going to say, a more realistic level, but how realistic is it that the devil's going to personally chase after you? I don't know. But sort of portraying it with a certain level of realism, maybe, or at least at a more personal, specific, individual level. Whereas part 2 of this is concerned with painting Faust in the context of a lot of other myths, particularly Greek mythology. There are a ton of Greek characters that come up. Faust himself he's not entirely absent from part 2. He definitely is there in parts, in Acts 4 and 5 of part 2, but he's pretty scarce in at least the first 3 acts of part 2, which I thought was weird. And yeah, so this was very up and down for me because I liked the first part, and then when I got into the second part, I was like, what is happening? And then finally by Act 4, it all kind of started coming together again, but by that point I was kind of ready for this to be over with. And I did like the ending, so that was good. So I ended up giving this 3 stars because it was a very up and down reading experience for me. So yeah, but yeah, part 2 was just seriously like a fever dream. I don't even know what happened in part 2. So, but yeah, entertaining, but definitely with some challenges as well. And some of the rhyming was ridiculous. This is a very old edition and translation of this. It's translated from the German by Bayard Taylor, and the copyright on the translation is 1870, so yeah, there you go. But he rhymes sparkle with darkle on more than one occasion, and then there are just other weird rhymes that happen too. But for the most part, it seems like the translation is fine. Although I don't speak German, so I can't really speak to the comparison between the original German and this, but I didn't have too many problems with the translation except for the odd, rhyming sparkle with darkle sort of thing. So yeah, 3 stars. I also this week finished Louise Erdrich's The Last Report on the Miracles at Little No Horse. If you're interested in reading this book, don't read the blurb. don't read the summary, it spoils something right in the summary, and I hate it when they do that. Now, I already knew the thing that gets spoiled in the summary because this was a reread for me. I'd read this many, many years ago, and I did remember that part about it. But yeah, who wants something spoiled in the summary? So yeah, this is the story of Father Damien Modeste, who is a white Catholic priest on a reservation of the Ojibwe Anishinaabe people somewhere in the environs of North Dakota. And at the beginning of the story, Father Damien is very, very old. He's close to 100, and he is visited by a fellow priest who has been sent to investigate the case of Sister Leopolda, who is a possible candidate for sainthood. And Father Damien sort of knows the truth about Sister Leopolda, which is that she ain't no saint. But he also sort of grapples with, you know, how much he should reveal to this fellow priest, because Father Damien has some secrets of his own, and you definitely find out about those as the story goes on, because you kind of get a whole picture of what Father Damien's life was like before he came to the reservation, what his early days on the reservation were like, his sort of friendships and relationships that he forms with people in the community, his interactions with the nuns at the, I think it's called the Sacred Heart Convent, that's there out on the outside of the reservation, etc., etc. So I quite liked this overall. It was in some ways a kind of focused character study on Father Damien, and I do love a good character study. There were some things that I took issue with in this book. So one is that I feel like there are a lot of extraneous side stories that happen that didn't need to be there and could have just not been there and wouldn't have sacrificed anything of value to the story. The other thing is, because this book is framed on the premise that Father Jude has come to the reservation to investigate the case of Sister Leopolda, I just felt like there should have been more Sister Leopolda in going through kind of the story of Father Damien's life. Now, don't get me wrong, she definitely comes up occasionally, but I just felt like there should have been more of her, because this is the, again, ostensible premise of the book. So yeah, more Sister Leopolda. And not just because she's a bad character that I kind of enjoy and love to hate. I mean, that's true too, but again, I just felt like there should have been more of her. So I ended up giving this 3.75 stars. I still really liked it. The writing is beautiful. I also really liked the kind of examination of Father Damien as this person who's led a quiet, modest sort of life, and how that's sort of a real heroism, as opposed to someone who leads a life that's very loud and attention-seeking and showy. So I liked that too. So 3.75 stars. I also finished this week Jorie Graham's collection of poetry, The End of Beauty. I ended up giving this 3 stars. This was also a reread for me, and when I read this the first time in graduate school, I did not like it. And this time when I reread it, I felt like I had more of an appreciation of what Jorie Graham is doing in this collection, but I still was not crazy about it. Because basically what she's doing here is, in a way, kind of writing an anti-poem, if that makes sense. So, okay, so when you read the poems in here, you're not getting enough information about whoever the speaker is to form a clear conception of what actually is going on in the poem. The language and writing is beautiful, and all the poems are set up like poems, but you never quite get enough information to really sort of form a coherent narrative of, okay, this is literally what's happening in the poem. So I'm going to read one to you. This is the shortest one in the collection, so hopefully you'll get an idea of what I mean by this. So this is called Evening Prayer. Someone has cut the grass, someone has cut your tall new grass. The sweetness smears a wild raw dress onto the air, and she is rising, turning now, in the sun and wind, and she is free. Walking home, I saw the shadow of a bird like a heart, like a scythe. I saw the shadow wings cross through a wall. The vacant lot weeds too swayed there, and thistles, pods. Terrible, silky wall, abandoned warehouse, thigh. And the elms, burnt now, were young all over it, and the wind in its fatigue. But the bird, fistful of time and sinew, blew, dragged down over the cinder block by light, lawed down and brush-stroked down, How he went abstract, clean, not hungry there and not afraid. Thou shalt dash it to pieces then, hand in the light. This potter's vessel, vast atomic girl, shall clean it further, further. Spill the hollow from her, know her. So, again, hopefully you could kind of tell while I was reading that the language is very nice and it's very poetic, but you don't know what's happening. I mean, it kind of sounds like the speaker is walking home and noticing stuff, but we don't get a picture of who the speaker is and what all these random observations add up to, right? So that's why I say in a way it's sort of an anti-poem. And I wrote in my review of this on Goodreads that by the time I got finished with this, I felt like I had acted out Waiting for Godot in poetic form because, you know, Beckett's play, in case you're not familiar, Beckett's play Waiting for Godot is about these two characters, Vladimir and Estragon, who basically stand around the whole time waiting for the title character Godot, and, you know, big spoiler, but he never shows up, right? And the same thing here, I feel like the whole time I was waiting for an actual image or idea or theme or narrative to emerge from the poems, but Jorie Graham's like, I'm not doing that. So that's why I say I feel like I acted out Waiting for Godot in poetic form. So again, I appreciate what she's doing here from a standpoint of poetic. She's trying something different that you usually don't see people do, but I was not here for it because, you know, I want to feel like there was a point to me reading this, you know? So I ended up giving this 3 stars. So I definitely would not recommend this as a collection for poetry novices. And again, the first time I read it, I totally hated it. But yeah, I think this is a collection for people who just really like poetry and really want to see it pushed beyond the bounds of what is normally considered to be poetry. So yeah, 3 stars. And then the last book I finished this week was Daniel Silva's The Messenger, which is the 6th book in the Gabriel Allon series. And I do like that Silva always themes these books around some kind of topic that he wants to explore. And in this case, it is the connection between Saudi Arabia and the financing of global terrorism, basically. And so this was published in 2006. And so there's, you know, some kind of exploration of how much Saudi money was involved in 9/11 and how the United States, especially people in power in the United States, are so sort of deeply embedded within Saudi money that they'll never sever the ties, even though these connections are clear and they definitely exist. So that was all very interesting. The book itself was kind of a hot mess sometimes. Like, there was a lot going on, and there were just too many players involved in this, but I did appreciate the kind of throwback to his earlier book, The Confessor, which I really liked. So this involves some characters that we've seen in previous books that Gabriel knows from the Vatican. So it was entertaining, even though it was messy, and it did eventually get me kind of sucked into the story, and as usual presented this fast-paced spy thriller, page-turning kind of book that you're like, ooh, what's going to happen now, you know? So I did end up giving this 3.5 stars, even though, again, there was a lot that was happening here, and probably too much, if we're being honest. So 3.5 stars. And as for what I am currently reading, I just started Grace Paley's The Little Disturbances of Man. This is a short story collection. I've read 1 story so far, which I quite enjoyed, so we'll see how the rest of these go. I also just started Kwame Anthony Appiah's The Lies That Bind Rethinking Identity. This is very interesting so far. I'm not very far into it, maybe like between 15 and 20 pages, but I have enjoyed it so far, and I do think he's saying things that are interesting, so I'm curious to see what else he will have to say in this. So that is the Friday Reads portion of this video. I'm now going to move to a complete wrap-up of my December reading, and I'm going to try to be short and sweet about this. So I got to restack these books so I know what's what. And as usual, I'm going to rank these from the book that I liked the least this month to the book that I liked the most. And I will say, in terms of kind of a summary, it was a pretty good reading month, if I'm being honest. I read 11 books in the month of December, which was great. And all of them were at least a 3-star read or higher, which is also good. And 3-star read is basically like, this was fine, you know, didn't love it, didn't hate it. Maybe you would like it, maybe you wouldn't, you know. So yeah, anyway, so let's go. So the book that I liked the least this month was Rumaan Allam's Leave the World Behind. I gave this book 3 stars. Basically, it has a really intriguing premise, but it doesn't really fully develop anything from there, and all it kind of gives you is atmospheric tension, and I feel like we've all had quite enough of that in 2020. Thank you very much. Next, in number 10 was Jorie Graham's The End of Beauty, which I also gave 3 stars, and I just talked about that, so I'm not going to say more about it. Then, in 9th place was Goethe's Faust, which I also gave 3 stars to. Again, I just talked about that, so I'm not going to say any more about that. Then Daniel Silva's The Messenger, which I gave 3.5 stars to. Kevin Young's poetry collection, Black Mariah, which I also gave 3.5 stars to. This is number 7? Yeah, I think this is 7. I've lost count already, sorry. So this is an interesting poetry collection that centers around the adventures or misadventures of a private eye named A.K.A. Jones and his sometimes lover Delilah Redbone. And yeah, it really reminded me of Langston Hughes's jazz poetry, and I enjoyed it overall. I found it entertaining, but as I said when I wrapped this up, I don't think for me any of the individual poems rose to the level of something extraordinary, so that's why this landed at 3.5 stars for me. Then coming in at number 6 was Anton Chekhov's The Lady with a Little Dog and Other Stories. This is a collection of Chekhov's late short stories. These were all written within the last 8 years. No, 6 years. No, 8 years. I can't do math. Sorry, 8 years of his life. So, thank God I don't teach math for a living. So these were all written at the end of his life. And as with most short story collections, I enjoyed some of them more than I enjoyed others. Some of them are kind of sketches of rural life, and some of them are more sort of character-driven, and I personally like the more character-driven stories that appeared here, but I would definitely recommend it if you like Chekhov and or Russian classics, more generally speaking. Then coming in at number 5 was Erdrich's The Last Report on Miracles at Little No Horse, which I gave 3.75 stars to. Then at number 4 was Aaron Lansky's Outwitting History, which was a very sort of fun nonfiction about this guy who goes around rescuing a bunch of Yiddish books that people are going to get rid of. I found it entertaining and informative, so it got 4 stars from me. So now we're up to my top reads of the month. So at number 3 was Henry Louis Gates Jr.'s Stony the Road, Reconstruction, White Supremacy, and the Rise of Jim Crow. And in this book, Gates really kind of thinks about the Harlem Renaissance and how the Harlem Renaissance portrayed this image of a quote-unquote new Negro. And if it is portraying an image of a so-called new Negro, then what was the old Negro? And that's basically what Gates kind of explores in this book, is what had been the image of African Americans, what were stereotypes about African Americans, and he explores that through popular culture, through science, through, you know, books and newspapers and things like that. Or when I say science, I really mean pseudoscience. Yeah, so this has a combination of text and images. At the end of every chapter, there are a bunch of images to kind of illustrate the concepts that Gates has been talking about in the actual text. So very good, very informative overall. Kind of dense reading though. And while it's not terribly academic in tone, it is still kind of academic in tone, so not exactly light reading. So I gave this book 4 stars. Number 2 for the month was Maaza Mengiste's The Shadow King. I also gave this book 4 stars. This was very fascinating to me. I have never read anything quite like it, and even though it was kind of a challenging read structurally and in terms of its content, because it's set during the 1935 Italian invasion of Ethiopia and subsequent war that followed. So, you know, there's a lot of violence that occurs and also sexual assault. it did kind of suck me in, and I was really interested in the central character of Hirut and what was going to happen to her. And again, I've never read anything quite like this, and I feel like I learned a lot about a conflict that I never really knew anything about. So this is my number 2 read for the month. And then my number 1 read for the month, I don't have here with me because I read it as an ebook, but this was Reni Eddo-Lodge's Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. I gave this book 4.5 stars, so it was my number 1 book of the month. And yeah, I learned a ton about Britain and its history of racism and the current culture of racism that exists in Britain, and there were some very interesting parallels that Lodge doesn't draw. Eddo-Lodge does not draw these herself, but because I've also read, you know, a bunch of stuff that has to do with racism in the United States, for me there were a lot of interesting parallels to be drawn between racism in Britain and racism in the United States. So that was very interesting and informative, and I think a definite must read if you have an interest in nonfiction about anti-racism. So that was my December reading. Thank you for watching. If you have thoughts about any of these books, I would love to hear them. Please feel free to let me know that down in the comments below, and let me know what your favorite reads of the month of December were. So I hope everyone is doing well and staying healthy. I hope you're doing good reading wherever you're reading. And until next time, would it kill you to call your mother?